Before week 4 of the NFL season begins, there are a couple of players that you need to be trading away. Now, it doesn't mean these players are terrible, but it might mean that their value is as high as it's going to get right now, and you need to sell them before it drops. And the first guy I want to talk about is the rookie receiver Xavier of the Chiefs, because I'm highly concerned about this guy's role right now. Look, Patrick Mahomes, through 3 games, has only completed 3 deep passes, 1 per game right now. And literally one of those plays was on a broken play touchdown in week 1 to Xavier, so really only 2 contested plays to this point deep, because teams are forcing the Chiefs to throw short just like they did last year. And what that's resulting in is right now Rashee Rice becoming one of the best fantasy assets, real life wide receivers, seeing these 12 target plus games on average because he's dominating in the short area. Heck, even Juju Smith-Schuster re-signed with this Chiefs team and he's seeing some more usage, that type of guy who's going to go 5, 6, 7 yards downfield. In fact, Juju's actually taking snaps away from Xavier. You can see right here, he's saying that this is Andy Reid talking about Xavier. I just chose to pull him off because of what we were doing there. So he was pulling Xavier off, and if you read the entire quote, he's basically just saying like he didn't feel comfortable with Worthy out there in certain situations. They were getting a guy like Juju Smith-Schuster out there instead. Not great. And to make matters worse, the Chiefs so far through 3 games ranked 17th in the NFL, throwing the ball just 58% of the time. They're throwing just 58% of the time. This is a team that year in and year out ranks in the top 5, if not number 1 overall in pass rate, and so far they're 17th. They're a run-heavy team right now because of the way that defenses are playing them with 2 high safeties, inviting them to throw short and run the ball. And this might sound crazy, but eventually Travis Kelce's going to get involved in this offense. Maybe not as much as he was 3 years ago when he was the best tight end in football for fantasy, but he's going to get more involved than he is right now, which only hurts and squeezes the target share for Xavier. So right now, Xavier production is being propped up by his big week 1 on Thursday Night Football, where everybody saw him in primetime have that rushing touchdown, have that broken play touchdown. He puts up over 20 fantasy points. This is all great, and this is the only reason he has any value. This is the only reason he's a top 50 receiver right now in fantasy. Without that production, he wouldn't even be in the top 80 fantasy receivers through 3 weeks without the broken play touchdown. Because yes, the touchdowns were nice and they did happen and he was on the field, so of course you can't just take them away from him. But in that game, he only earned 11% of the targets. There's 3 targets in that game. A week later in week 2, now this is nice. He sees 17% of the targets, 5 or 6 overall opportunities in that game, but he doesn't do anything with them. He gets shut down. And this past week, once again, just 11% of the targets. This is a guy who was taken in the first round of the NFL draft, was taken in like the 7th round, 8th round of fantasy drafts, and he's only seen 13% of the targets, and he's being pulled off the field right now in situations overall on the year through 3 games, 6 catches, 81 yards. That's not going to get it done 27 yards per game, and that's not even with Travis Kelce producing. This is the biggest red flag here. He's coming off the field, getting pulled off the field because his coach doesn't trust him in situations, and eventually Kelce's also going to start producing. I recently traded Xavier this past week in the Flock Fantasy League for a package deal, and I believe that you should be trying to trade him as well. You can see my rest of season rankings trade tool right here. Xavier is my 68th overall player right now, so anybody above him, Amari Cooper, I would trade Xavier for, although off his big week, you're probably not going to be able to get that done. I would go out there and get George Pickens for sure if you can before George Pickens' blow-up game. Tank Dell for sure. T. Higgins. These are ideal targets that you can go, and these are trades that are happening right now according to Fantasy Calc Database, which is a website you can track all public trades. Those are guys I would trade worthy for. All right, the next man that you should trade, you should pick him up off the waivers, which you probably just recently did, and trade is Jauan Jennings after his explosion of a game in week 3 on Sunday. Now, if you were lucky enough to watch our content last week before he exploded, or you were lucky enough to read it on Yahoo and some of my other content out there, you would know that Jauan Jennings was somebody we were telling you to go get. Because in week 3, Jennings goes out there without Deebo Samuel, without George Kittle, without Christian McCaffrey, runs 89% of the routes, earns an insane 40% target share, and he translates this into a big time performance. I mean, you probably already know by now, and odds are if you were facing him in your league, there's a good chance you lost, although it's not impossible to get by. I did in one of those leagues. 175 yards, 3 touchdowns, 49.5 fantasy points. It was a career high day for him, one of the best productions we've ever seen for a wide receiver, which is crazy that it came from Jauan Jennings. He took advantage of a great matchup against the Rams. The Rams allowed 9 passing yards per play, the highest in the NFL by 17%. And as I mentioned earlier, of course, that increased volume came because Deebo Samuel was ruled out for this game. George Kittle ended up getting a hamstring injury midweek, and he's going to miss that game and likely their next game as well. And Christian McCaffrey is still not playing for the 49ers. But here's the thing. Deebo Samuel and George Kittle, they might miss week 4, but then after that, they're going to return to this offense a week later, most likely, and you're not going to get Jauan Jennings seeing this type of production ever again, if not yet over the next next 4 or 5 games combined. Like, I believe there's a better chance he scores 5 or 6 points this upcoming week than goes for 20 points yet again, because the matchup's not going to be anywhere near the same. And look at this right here. You can see they're 10-point favorites against the Patriots, who the Patriots have at least a better secondary than the Rams. And being 10-point favorites, assuming this is how this game plays out like Vegas suggests here, you're probably going to get a situation where Brock Purdy is throwing 10 to 15 times less per, or in this game specifically compared to last week. You're not going to get a 40 pass attempt game. So I do think that Jennings is a great short-term start for really just a week at this point. Like, you shouldn't have spent more than 5 to 10% of your fab budget on him. You probably did. And I think his value is so high right now, you need to trade him before he's not worth anything. And if you're curious, some recent trades that just happened for him, you can see right here in Fantasy Calc Database. On the 25th, Jauan, Jennings, and Darnell Mooney were paired up to get Drake London. Yeah, I do that every single day of the week. J.K. Dobbins and Jauan Jennings paired up to get Brandon Ayuk. Yeah, I would do that instantly if that trade came through right now. You can see just a bunch of garbage right here. Lazard, Jauan Jennings, Ramondre Stevenson, Quinn Johnson for Jahmyr Gibbs. Do that all day, every single day possible. DK Metcalf and Jennings for A.J. Brown. I don't know about that. I kind of like DK Metcalf. This is a perfect one. Austin Eckler, who just got an injury, and Jauan Jennings for Devon Achane, who everybody is down on. Yes, please give me that. So these are real trades that are happening right now. And you might say, oh, my league mates won't do those trades. It's because you're probably not working for it. You're probably not doing it right. You're probably offering them garbage, or you're just being too forceful. Learn how to trade. Jauan Jennings is literally one of the best blocking wide receivers in the NFL. And once Deebo Samuel and Kittle come back, he'll go back to doing just that, being the 4th option at best in the passing attack. And he's going to be a blocking wide receiver and not scheme production like he was in week 2. Now is basically your only time to go and get rid of him. Because if I pull up my top 150 rest of season rankings right here, the trade tool, he's not even in it. Jauan Jennings is not in my top 150 players the rest of the season. If we're talking about for week 4, yeah, he's going to be in my top 36 receivers, but that's about it. After that, he's not going to be in the top 150, meaning that I would rather have any of these guys in my top 150 right here, as you can see, over one Jauan Jennings. Darnell Mooney for sure right now. Jerry Jeudy, Josh Downs. I'd take any of these guys in my opinion. Khalil Shakur for sure right now over Josh Jennings. Now, if you're wondering how you can get this tool, the rest of season rankings, to access some trades and access it to help you with your trades, well, beautiful people, that would be my fantasy blueprint. It's just one of the tools that's in there. There's also waiver wire tiers and rankings. There's rankings and projections for every week, game by game matchup notes for every fantasy relevant player, and a whole lot more. And it's simple to get. If you want my fantasy blueprint, it'll be linked down below. You just follow these 2 simple steps right here to join 20,000 other people who currently have access. And the biggest thing, when you sign up through one of our partners, and I'll show you those partners in just a second, if you do not make your fantasy playoffs, I'll refund your one-time payment of $10. It's as simple as that. This is a risk-free offer, and here's the deal. A couple of partners, Underdog right here you can see is one of our partners, Better is one of our partners, and you just sign up to get my blueprint risk-free. You follow the steps, they'll be linked down below. So to get access to all these tools with nearly 20,000 others, the tools that I use in all my leagues right now, you can just scan this QR code on the screen or click the link in the description below, and then all you do after that is take those tools and smack around your league mates with them. So go ahead, get access now. Now, the next man I want to talk about is Dallas Goedert, the guy you should be selling high on coming off of a monster game, and I mean a monster performance for Goedert. This dude just put up career highs against New Orleans in week 3. He goes for 30 fantasy points, 10 catches, 170 yards, absolutely dominant on 11 targets. Again, career highs all across the board. In this game, according to Fantasy Life, Dallas Goedert went out there and in week 3 runs 91% of the routes. Okay, fine, but he sees a 31% target share. And I want to point out him earning 31% of the targets because that's only the 3rd time in the last 3 years that he's done that. The 3rd time in the last 3 years that he's earned at least 30% of the targets. It's not something that happens often. It's not something that's usually in his talent or skill set profile. And what do you know? He does it in a game where Devonta Smith leaves early with an injury, A.J. Brown doesn't play, and even their wide receiver 3, Britton Covey, doesn't play. So the Eagles literally down their top 3 receivers in this game. That's when Dallas Goedert breaks out. I don't think that that's a coincidence. I think they desperately needed him because they were only leaning on Dallas Goedert and Saquon Barkley, a running back, in the passing game in the second half. So something tells me this isn't going to continue when A.J. Brown, when Devonta Smith come back. And now realistically, we might just be 1 week away. Like, it might take a week for Devonta Smith to come back from his concussion, or he could play in week 4, and it might take another week for the hamstring injury of A.J. Brown. But after that, you're getting the same old Dallas Goedert earning maybe 4 or 5 targets, if that, in the game. Now, the Eagles do have a bye week. They play week 4 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, then they go on a bye and come back in week 5 against the Browns, as you can see right here on October 13th. So I do think they're kind of incentivized to not rush back Devonta Smith from a concussion, which usually takes a week anyways, and not rush back A.J. Brown. So you might get one more game of solid production out of Dallas Goedert. But don't expect that production to be anywhere near his career high performance, right? They're career highs for a reason. They only happen once. They don't happen often. Don't expect 170 yards. Expect closer to maybe you get lucky if he even sees 80, 90 yards. The projection's not even going to be that high on him. So this is the time right now to be selling a guy because he only has one more game where he'll be the priority of his offense. And odds are, in my opinion, they're probably going to make the priority of their offense Saquon Barkley in the run game. As you can see right here, Dallas Goedert is just my 108th overall overall player. Like, he's not even in my top 100. This was just one big week. It's an outlier. I would trade him for so many different wide receivers right now. Like Christian Kirk off of a nice week and trending up. I would trade him for Christian Kirk. I would trade him for Jonathan Brooks before he comes back from his injury. I would trade him for Mark Andrews and buy low on Mark Andrews, which I recently did in another one of my leagues. There's a whole bunch of guys. Ladd McConkey is a great option if you can go and get him. Zach Moss, a great option if you can go and get him. Everybody loves to overvalue the recency bias of things that just happen. When a big performance like that happens, everybody's like, why the heck would I trade Dallas Goedert away? And then in 2 weeks, you're like, oh yeah, because he's getting me 4 points. The next man I want to talk about is Carson Steele, the rookie running back for the Kansas City Chiefs, who was a hot waiver wire priority just a week ago, and odds are you might have spent a lot of your budget. I saw some people spending 40, 50% of their budget on Carson Steele just because he's a Chiefs running back. If you spend anything over, let's say 25%, even once you start hitting 15 to 20%, in my opinion, that's high. But he was generating all that hype, and he still kind of has that hype because after his week 3 usage, when he was the starter, or at least splitting the backfield with Samaje Perine, it was pretty good, and it's going to give him maybe some more value when trades come up this week, or at least discussions that I believe you should be trading him away. Because in his first game without Isaiah Pacheco and an expanded role, according to Fantasy Life, Steele played 64% of the snaps. He handled 61% of the overall carries, but when you factor out the running back or the wide receiver carries in this game, the quarterback carries, he actually saw in this game 74% of the backfield carries. So 64% of the snaps, 74% of the backfield carries. That's good usage. I mean, this is strong production, and he handled both of the carries inside the 5-yard line, which kind of makes sense since he's like a 235-pound running back. Now, this usage translated to 17 carries. He had a reception. He total 72 rushing yards, 2 in the receiving game. So 74 total yards, 8.4 fantasy points. Not the strongest of fantasy days, but the usage indeed was strong. However, there is some stuff about the usage that we should point out. Like right here, if we scroll over, yeah, he got all the inside the 5-yard carries, according to Fantasy Life. You can see 100% inside the 5. But the long down and distance, the obvious passing downs, just 14% of the snaps. The 2-minute offense didn't play in the 2-minute offense. This was the role of one Samaje Perine instead. And that's important because you're looking at Carson Steele now only being this early down grinder who gets some red zone touches, but not going to see passing down usage. And that's a concern. That leaves you not a lot of upside in fantasy. Because if Samaje Perine is seeing that work, that's a concern for Carson Steele in the games where he doesn't score a touchdown. In the games where he doesn't score a touchdown, you're basically looking at 14 to 16 carries like he had this past week where he had 17 carries, and he's a middling runner. He's not an explosive runner. He's not a guy who's going to average 5 yards per carry for you or consistently go out there and pull off these big runs where you can have a 20-yard touchdown run. He's going to get you 3 or 4 yards per carry. And if that's the case, well, here's the concern. You're probably more weeks than not going to have 8 fantasy points from him, 7 fantasy points when he doesn't find the end zone. And what's even more concerning is that Kareem Hunt was signed, but now heading into this week, he's officially signed to the 53-man roster and will be active for week 4. Now, we don't know what his role will be, but he is indeed going to be at least have the opportunity to see some carries, which hurts one Carson Steele, a rookie, which maybe they trust Hunt more. And then also Clyde Edwards-Helaire could return as soon as week 5. So he might only be out 1 more week as he deals with PTSD. So this is a interesting situation in the Chiefs backfield to where we can see 3 or 4 running backs in a messy backfield involved right now. So for anybody who thinks that Steele is a highly valuable running back, well, try and trade him away to those people and get a lot in return. If you want to know where I value Steele as of right now, he's my 100th overall player. So he's right around in my top 100 players. So anybody above him right here, Jonathan Brooks, 1-for-1 is a great trade in my opinion. If you can get a Rashad White, if you can get somebody maybe with a little bit more upside, you probably can't get Rome Odunze off his big week. But if you could get, like, my favorite trades right now would be like a Carson Steele for a Tank Dell or a T. Higgins. I don't know if you can pull that off, but that would be incredible. All right, let's stick with the running back position because I want to get rid of this next guy who's had kind of an up and down season, but he's coming off of a nice usage week. And that would be the Browns running back Jerome Ford, who, look, he regained his backfield in week 3. Like we saw in week 2, Deontay Foreman, the veteran, come out of nowhere and see the majority of the carries. It wasn't the case in week 3 because Ford went out there for the Browns and he played 83% of the snaps and he handled 63% of the backfield carries. So once again, like in week 1 when he played 73% of the snaps, 86% of the backfield carries, he was getting that strong usage. So it seems like week 2 was just kind of this weird usage where he only saw 26 carries and Foreman was getting more work. And more importantly, Ford stayed on the field for the 2-minute offense and the long down and distance snaps, which was important because it led to 3 catches for over 30 receiving yards, and that just added to a nice fantasy day. And really, it saved his fantasy day because he only had 10 carries on the ground and for 37 yards. So that's not great. These receptions, 3 for 33, really saved his day. And this was supposed to be a good matchup against the Lions, and he still couldn't get going on the ground. And I personally don't believe it has anything to do with Ford's skill set, although I don't think he's the most dynamic runner, but I'll talk about why I think he's having trouble on the ground, and I think it's going to continue in a moment. Because you might look at his upcoming schedule and you go, oh, I mean, he's facing the Raiders, one of the worst run defenses in the NFL. Then he's facing the Commanders, a bottom 5 run defense so far in the NFL. Like, these are great matchups. Well, yeah, literally, he just had a great matchup and it didn't come through for him, and I'm kind of suspect on it coming through in those matchups. Again, more on that in just 1 second. And instead of teasing it more, let's actually dive into that reason. It all has to do with the offensive offensive line. You can see Mary Kay right here says the Browns are placing right guard, and this is a Pro Bowler, by the way, Wyatt Teller on IR with a sprained knee. I think it's a sprained MCL. I'm not sure exactly. So he's going to miss at least 4 games. So that's not great. So your best guard is now going to miss at least 4 games. You go over to the offensive line page. They already have Jack Conklin not playing the first 3 weeks with an injury, I believe a hamstring. They just got back Jedrick Willis from an injury as well. So this is an offensive line that is down their right tackle, their left tackle is still banged up, and now they're down a Pro Bowl guard in Wyatt Teller, which when he was gone last year, this offensive line fell apart. So I think that's a big reason why this guy is only averaging 10 carries for 37 yards. Then there's also the reason and the fact that his quarterback right now, Deshaun Watson, stinks in this overall offense because of that stinks. This is NFL Pro's database, and you can see Deshaun Watson is all the way down here at 29th overall, and this is being ranked by your efficiency. So he is literally only better so far than Caleb Williams, who's a rookie, and Will Levis, who has looked terrible in quarterback efficiency so far. And by the way, what factors into that is bad plays, interceptions. That's why Will Levis is all the way down here. Some really bad plays so far. This is how bad Watson has been. Below Bryce Young, below Bo Nix, below Trevor Lawrence, who has looked absolutely atrocious. So the offensive line is banged up. The offense doesn't look great. And then there's also the fact that Jerome Ford might not be the starting running back the entire year. I mean, we saw as soon as week 2, Deontay Foreman took over that role. And eventually we're going to maybe see Nick Chubb this year. He's eligible to return in week 5 off of the PUP list. I don't think he's actually going to, but maybe we see him in week 7, week 8 in some part-time role. And if that's the case, well then Jerome Ford, if he had any value as like a starting running back this year, maybe it's only going to be for a couple more weeks in a bad offense behind a bad offensive line. I recently traded away Jerome Ford in that Flock Fantasy League for straight up 1-for-1 Rashid Shaheed off of a down week. I think Shaheed is a better player long-term and going to actually be a starter in a quality offense when Ford might not be that in just a couple weeks. Ford's outside my top 80 rest of season players. I think trading for a Calvin Ridley off a bad week, who just got shadowed by Jair Alexander this past week, and Will Levis just was scared to even throw Jair's way. I think Calvin Ridley could be an interesting buy low 1-for-1 trade for a guy like Jerome Ford. Now, before we get into this next running back who just had 150 yards this past week and you should trade him away, I want to say 67% of you are not subscribed to this YouTube channel. Now, a lot of you have been subscribing lately, so I appreciate that, but here's the deal. If you made it this far in the video, I assume you liked the video. So the gentleman's agreement of this channel is we shake on it right here. You hit the subscribe button. You're finding value. That gives me value because it helps the channel grow. It helps me put out even more content. So, gentleman's agreement, we're shaking on it. Hit that subscribe button. Takes 2 seconds. Now, that back who just had a 150-yard game, an incredible game in his first game with new quarterback Andy Dalton, was one Chuba Hubbard, and it was really good. You could see my tweet. I referenced this in a video earlier in the week, but the Panthers offense scored on just 12% of their drives the first 2 weeks with Bryce Young. Then they scored on 64% of their drives today, which was week 3 with Andy Dalton. The offense was looking a whole lot better. And Chuba Hubbard continued to see strong usage. In week 3, you can see right here, 60% of the snaps, 68% of the rush attempts, but his usage was actually better than this because Miles Sanders was playing on the last 2 drives of the game when the Panthers were up by 2 to 3 scores, so Hubbard got pulled. Realistically, he was playing over 70% of the snaps, seeing over 75% of the rush attempts. This great usage and the good game for the Panthers led to Hubbard finishing as a top 5 running back, where he saw an insane 26 total touches. He had 114 yards on the ground, 55 in the air, finds the end zone, so he has nearly 170 total yards. So, oh my goodness, Sal, why am I saying that this should be somebody you should trade away? Especially when he's running behind an offensive line that has been a bright spot. The Panthers offensive line, terrible last year. They invested in their guard position this offseason. Probably a top 10, maybe top 5 unit right now. Well, here's the issue with Hubbard. He's definitely going to start one more game and be the full workhorse back this upcoming week, but there is a little bit of a concern because one Jonathan Brooks, the running back that the Panthers took in the second round of the draft, an exciting player out of Texas, averaged over 155 yards per game his final 8 college starts. He's only a week away from returning in week 5. Now, the nice thing for Chuba Hubbard is his matchup is great. He's going to be at home. He's going to face a Bengals soft run defense right now that ranks bottom 10 in the NFL. They're allowing the 7th most rushing yards per game. So this is a nice matchup if you really desperately needed to hold on to him for one more week. But it's also the perfect sell high window because the dude just had 170 yards, 30 fantasy points, a top 5 finish. He's probably not going to do that again this week, and then Jonathan Brooks returns. And for what it's worth, Deepak Chona, my friend Sports MD Analysis on Twitter, says that Jonathan Brooks, when he returns in week 5, likely to be 85% efficiency, so 85% himself, and then by week 9 at the latest, he'll see a full workload is what they're projecting. So it could be even earlier than week 9, but either way, in week 5, this is becoming a split backfield with Jonathan Brooks in some regard. So Chuba Hubbard, right now is the time to sell him. I'd sell him straight up 1-for-1 for Jonathan Brooks if you can right now. Some other guys you may be able to trade him for off this big week: T. Higgins, Tank Dell, Zach Moss. I would do those deals as well. Now, the next guy I want to talk about is Courtland Sutton, who's coming off of his his best game by far of the season for the Denver Broncos. Sutton went out there, he caught 7 of 11 targets, so some really nice usage, 68 yards against the Tampa Bay Bucks. He puts up 13.8 fantasy points. So again, this was a nice day. We finally got a usable performance from Bo Nix, and they played from ahead, so there wasn't a ton of blitzes as well, and that kind of helped this production for Sutton. And now through 3 games this season, Sutton leads the team with a 24% target share. That 24% target share is 10 more targets than anybody else on the team right now. He has 25 targets through 3 games. But the problem is 48% of his targets, so only 48% are catchable, meaning more than 50% of his targets right now haven't been catchable, ranking 86th amongst wide receivers. If this was to continue for the rest of the season, there is no way Courtland Sutton, outside of scoring a lot of touchdowns, which doesn't seem like the Broncos offense is going to do, there's no way Sutton's finishing as a top 48 wide receiver, top 50 receiver if half of his targets aren't catchable. Look, Bo Nix has not been good. He currently ranks right now 29th in yards per attempt. He's averaging just 5.3 yards per attempt, and he's 27th in quarterback efficiency. Like, look, there's going to be games where Bo Nix actually looks good, and in these games, there's going to be nice performances for Courtland Sutton, but the concern is the consistency. The consistency in Bo Nix's play, the accuracy for a rookie quarterback who had some questions coming into the league, it's a concern. And it's also a concern when you look at his literal upcoming matchups. The Jets, the Chargers, the Saints in 3 of the next 4 games. You know what those people have in common? They're all top 4 secondaries in coverage right now, according to PFF. Number 2, the Chargers. 3, the Jets. Number 4, the Saints. A brutal stretch of games the next month of the season. We might look back and say that this 13.8 performance from Courtland Sutton was his best performance in the first half of the season and maybe one of his best 3 performances of the entire year. I do think Sutton scores a touchdown at some point this year, so I think he'll score more than 13 points at some point, but even then, I'm not certain. So these have been the players that you should be trading away before week 4 starts right now. But if you want to see some of the players, we talked about some in this video that you should trade them for, well, here's the running backs you should trade for this week and the wide receivers before it's too late, before week 4 begins. See y'all in the next one. Appreciate y'all a ton. And before you go, gentlemen's agreement, hit that subscribe button.